today very briefly about a blog post that I wrote at the beginning of this year as part of the Storytelling with Data Challenge. It was a recap of that challenge for the month of January. And for more on that, visit my blog, anthonydata.wordpress.com. That's hopefully you can see that right here at the top. And then it's linked specifically in this blog post, which is the most recent posting as of today. And in here, what I wanted to focus on, well, I'll start by saying that the person who's probably going to get the most out of this video is going to be someone who's wants to learn a little bit more about either of these two tools, or at least the differences, I guess, between these two tools from a very specific perspective. And this is not a comprehensive comparison. This is just a data point of one for me, because I am very well versed in Klipfolio, and in having used Tableau for the first time as part of this challenge earlier this year, I was definitely able to see some immediate differences in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And I wanted to highlight those in this video. And these differences might mean more to some people than others, depending on where you're looking to focus on. The other thing I'm really going to briefly talk about is the different types of objectives that you have with the dashboard that you may be using, and how to appropriately design a dashboard in either of these tools, and maybe even inform which of these tools you might lean towards. And so I mentioned that, and I provide an example as part of this blog post, so you'll see it here. But this is the section specifically where I talk about the difference between monitoring, exploration, and explanation. So depending on your objective, if you're monitoring, you've already put a lot of thought, or there's already a lot of importance surrounding very particular metrics that you want to be informed within seconds, minutes, hours, some sort of time frame that's going to be relatively short. We're not talking about months or years. That is going to have a very specific action tied directly to it. And for these monitoring types of dashboards, you already know a lot in advance. So you're just looking for changes, and when upon seeing those changes, you're going to have some action that you can take, because otherwise the dashboard is strictly informative, and there's no action associated with something going up and down, above or below a threshold, and then B, it defeats the whole purpose of monitoring something in the first place, because then what's the point of the threshold in the first place if it can't be acted upon? So the objective there, and the tools that you would really need to build something that is strictly for monitoring, is going to be different and less requiring less functionality than, say, exploration and perhaps even explanation, right? These latter two categories of dashboards, objectives, are going to require filtering, being able to be highly interactive for sure. If we're talking about exploration and even explanation, there needs to be a lot of control from the person who is using this tool from a design perspective, to utilize color and be able to have more control over how information is being displayed. And so it's important to keep these objectives in mind. And so at a very high level, my experience with Klipfolio is that it is very great at monitoring. It can connect to many different data sources in a relatively intuitive way. I can't speak to Tableau. I don't have that experience. But for Klipfolio, it's very great for making those connections, bringing 3 or 4 different applications all into one so that you have one dashboard that is showing information across a bunch of third-party softwares in one view. And again, knowing your metrics in advance, actionable metrics, is very helpful. And then to a certain extent, it's also good for exploration. There's some features that's part of the product that supports being able to filter views and perform some initial exploration depending on the metrics that you are monitoring. Where it's definitely the weakest is in the explanation side of objectives. So taking that information and then wanting to share it with a team member, or wanting to use it as a basis for presenting at a meeting. And this isn't specific to the product itself necessarily. This is just, I think, a comment and as to dashboards as a whole aren't necessarily the best tools for explaining an observation, because the goal there is then communicating a message. And because you have exploration as part of arriving at that message, it is not, going to be best suited for one very particular message, because the data is changing all the time. If what you are doing is monitoring a particular set of metrics. So the explanation side of it is, it can be used. It's not to say that it can't be used for serving this role of being able to explain insights to others. It's just that it's not as effective. And I would say that it is, to a larger extent, less effective in Klipfolio than it is in Tableau. And I'm going to mention a few very specific observations to drive that point home. But very quickly, I wanted to show you what I was able to produce in Klipfolio. Again, this is the tool that I am most comfortable with. And contrary to what I just said, that Klipfolio is best suited for relatively real-time monitoring of very particular metrics, I've used it in a way where you are able to construct some sort of a story or some sort of a message. So here, in a nutshell, I was trying to emphasize that over time, the number of people with commuting times greater than 50 minutes has increased over time based on publicly available data sets. And I'm not going to go into detail there, but this is one way I used to emphasize that sort of message. I have an overall chart up above showing the increase with some smaller title annotation to describe what's going on. And below, I have 2 different charts. The emphasis from a coloring perspective, more on the blue, because this is focusing on that subgroup with greater than 15 minutes commute times. And you can see how those numbers compare. And then there's a indicator to show that that's been increasing as you to corroborate what you see in the spark line here, as well as here, and then some text here and here to support that message. So again, the idea was to really push the limits of Klipfolio in the direction where I feel it's actually weaker. And by contrast, we can see in Klipfolio the same message that I attempted to get across in Klipfolio, but using Tableau. Now, I'll go into the differences, the very specific differences, in a second. But just wanted to mention that this is just a dashboard, which was a more or less replica of the last dashboard I showed you in Klipfolio. But there's also a lot more to the product than just this one dashboard. If our objective is communicating a message, Tableau actually has this stories feature of their product that allows you to break up a collection of charts that you might have into smaller sections so that it's a little easier to digest. So this is that chart that I had at the very top, and I have some annotations describing what's going on. And then also notice the use of these in-chart annotations here to point out very specific, a key event in this case here, and then also the most recent available data there. And then we can just tab over and look at the next chart with some description up above, and then looking at the breakdown here. And so it's sort of taking that same dashboard and breaking it up into easier to digest pieces that have a very specific message around it, or sort of sub message that contributes to the overall point that the estimated number of commuters traveling greater than 15 minutes to work is increasing. So I really like this feature, and this is where, again, I think Tableau can serve that role of explanatory dashboards much better than Klipfolio can, with certain features that I just mentioned. And to make sure that I didn't forget some of the ones that I did mention in the blog post, I mentioned in-chart annotations. So that's just like what I showed you. In Klipfolio, we don't have control over the tooltip. So when you hover over, what you see is what you get. We can't change this outside of just renaming commuters to some other label. And so that's what I mean here by the in-chart annotations. Out-of-the-box filtering, this is something that I don't have available to demonstrate here, but which is really cool is that you can actually click on charts, particular data points, and if we went back to that dashboard view that we were looking at, that big collection of charts in the dashboard, upon selecting a very particular area, there's a setting that you can set that allows for the entire dashboard to then filter on the basis of what you're highlighting or what you're selecting. So it's not just a regular filter, necessarily like this, where you can kind of just pick an item and then it'll update the chart. It updates the entire dashboard. And this is also possible in Klipfolio, but it does involve a bit more configuring than just a couple clicks of a button. So in terms of ease of being able to add that functionality, Tableau makes it really, really easy from the user standpoint in implementing that type of a feature. In Klipfolio, it is possible, and it is very useful to be able to have sort of a picker here. But the other thing that's worth pointing out is it does have to be an actual filter selector, as you see here. You're not clicking on points on the chart. You're not clicking on this chart, on this bar, on this very particular bar, and then having all of the data change as you would in Tableau. The way it behaves, that filtering capability behaves differently between the two products, being more capable in Tableau than Klipfolio. So that's one thing I really enjoyed. I got a wow here because I really like that. The stories I touched on already. So those were the three things that really stuck out at me that I really liked, I really enjoyed. And again, it comes back to whether your objective is to monitor, whether you're focusing on exploration or explanation. And I mean, dashboards, what's nice about it is it touches on a little bit of all three. I'm sure Tableau is perfectly capable of monitoring KPIs as well, sort of the way that I introduced at the beginning, which is what Klipfolio is most suited for. But I'm not here to speak to what Tableau's capabilities are in that realm, because I've found that Klipfolio already meets that particular need for me. So again, to try to reiterate what I was trying to drive across overall, for monitoring and initial exploration, Klipfolio has been really great. I haven't had any major hurdles, and I've found it to be a very great product for those purposes. You do have to know in advance what your KPIs are to really, and make sure that they're actionable to really get the most use out of that. And then for initial exploration, for exploratory features like applying filters, changing views, all that can be done in Klipfolio as well. But I also would not limit myself, if I was in the position of someone who wants to dig deeper into the data, to just a tool like Klipfolio or just Tableau. And then finally, it's really an explanatory aspect of being able to communicate a very particular message, where Klipfolio, I think, falls short. There is no stories aspect to this product. This is the best I was able to come up with as far as just thinking about how charts are arranged, adding text, helper text, annotations, but you're limited much more so than you are in a tool like Tableau. So I think this is really where Tableau shines. And again, there are trade-offs there, and it's all going to be depending on what data you're working with, how quickly it's changing, how closely you need to be able to monitor it, how many different connections to other data sources of data that you're making. If this is all just being fed in from a spreadsheet, well, then there's not very much complication. But if you're connecting 3 or 4 different third-party softwares, QuickBooks, Google Analytics, etc., then how that information is presented in Tableau and the ease in being able to make those connections versus Klipfolio would be a separate issue to consider, and where what we've just said now, it can be influenced by those factors. So hopefully this was helpful to those who were either familiar with these tools already, but just wanted to, and by tools, I mean more generally like dashboards, and want to learn how these two are in particular are different from my perspective. And then also to others who maybe are in the process of evaluating a number of different tools, and these are some subtle differences between the two. And I really hope that the points about monitoring versus exploration and explanatory objectives really sunk in, and I've written more about that. So see my blog, anthonydata.wordpress.com, and I have some other blog postings there. Thank you.